Hi everyone, it's Katrina. The City of Bones. Archaeologists in 2011 discovered 97 bodies crammed into a house in the ancient village of Hamin Manga, located in northeast China. The site dates back to 3000 BC, making it at least 5,000 years old. The bodies ranged in age from 19 to 35, and they'd all been buried in haste. What archaeologists have been trying to figure out ever since is why nearly 100 dead people were stuffed into a single house. Did they die from a natural disaster, or were they trapped in a fire and unable to get out? The bit about the fire is unlikely. It's also unlikely that they were killed by an invading army. If this had been some kind of Neolithic slaughter, the people probably wouldn't have been buried. Instead, researchers think the victims were affected by an outbreak of infection. The infection was likely caused by a strain of deadly bacterium called Y. pestis, the same thing responsible for the Black Death that came thousands of years later. There is no definitive proof that this Neolithic settlement was wiped out by the Black Death. However, scientists have found evidence of Black Plague deaths in Europe from the Neolithic age, meaning it is possible. One of the theories is that rats, carriers of the bacterium that causes the plague, were attracted to the new settlement. These early humans in China were some of the first to domesticate animals and settle down to grow crops. Being close to animals helped in the transference of disease, while the stockpiling of crops attracted the rats. This was a perfect man-made recipe for disease, and we can see in this house of corpses just how devastating it was on early communities. People doomed themselves simply by trying to advance society. Ubar of the Sands. Ubar is an ancient ruined city that can be found in the small village of Shisir, Oman. Archaeological excavations at the ancient outpost, which was likely a stop on the Silk Road, show it was once a formidable place. The city boasted 8 massive towers and tall walls to keep out invaders. There is evidence here of human habitation going back to 2800 BC, although the towers were built much more recently. According to legend, the city of Ubar doomed itself by forsaking God and giving in to earthly pleasures. The residents of the city supposedly became rich. They could afford to live lavish lives, and they gave in to temptation. In response to their heathenism and blasphemous ways, God smote them. He opened up a sinkhole beneath their fortress, and it fell into the desert sands and was destroyed. The legend is pretty close to reality. The main part of the city was its fortress, an administrative structure that likely guarded access to the only water source for miles in all directions. A sinkhole opened up beneath it around the year 100 AD, possibly caused by the depletion of the water reservoir beneath. The fortress then collapsed in on itself. There was no way to get water, and the city was abandoned for centuries. It wasn't until a new tower was built over the ancient ruins around 1500 years later that people returned. Cuicuilco. Cuicuilco can be found on the shores of Lake Texcoco in Mexico City. The city emerged nearly 3,000 years ago in 800 BC and grew to be an important regional hub and ceremonial center. The city was inhabited by around 20,000 people, complete with pyramids, platform structures, great plazas, and everything you would expect from a powerful Mesoamerican metropolis. The economy was based on agriculture, as the locals farmed the fertile lands of the Mexico Valley. What the inhabitants of Cuicuilco didn't understand when they built their great city was that they did so right beside an enormous volcano. At the end of the pre-classic period, around the year 100 AD, the mighty Xitle volcano erupted. It released a monumental surge of lava that flowed over Cuicuilco and covered it in hot volcanic rock. This led to the immediate abandonment of the city and pushed the people toward the larger hubs of Toluca and Teotihuacan. The culture of the Cuicuilcas was incorporated by the one at Teotihuacan, and the influx of immigrants helped it to become the most powerful center in Mexico for the following 500 years. Drought in Mayapan. A recent study done by a team of international scientists has shed light on the destruction of the Maya civilization. Specifically, the scientists looked at the ancient Maya capital of Mayapan. Based on their findings, Mayapan was the last Maya stronghold to fall, abandoned completely by the middle of the 15th century. And unfortunately for the Maya, they had doomed their own city with their arrogance. For 3,000 years, the Maya people ruled the Yucatan Peninsula and the surrounding area. But by the 9th century AD, they had spiraled into a steep decline. Within about 100 years, most of the Maya territory was in chaos and ruin. The one place that survived while all others were falling was Mayapan. Its resilience established it as the center of the empire in the 12th century and allowed it to go on thriving for another 300 years. It was an incredibly developed and modern city. At its peak, it contained between 15,000 and 17,000 people. Whereas most of the Maya Empire was destroyed due to drought, Mayapan was not. In all likelihood, it could have survived all the way until the arrival of the Spaniards. That is, if it wasn't for the Xiu family. This was a family of aristocrats who had lost a significant amount of power because of the drought, disrupting the rest of the empire. In 1441, purely out of anger and desperation, they led a revolt against the thriving city of Mayapan. The city was sacked, torn apart from the inside, and reduced to ashes. The greatness of the Maya was killed overnight, and by none other than the Maya themselves. Big shout out to Cecilia Gallegos and G-Star. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The end of the Byzantines. The Byzantine Empire had a garbage problem. They produced so much garbage that they doomed themselves to a world of disease and misery. The Byzantine Empire was the last remaining vestige of the original Roman Empire. It was the eastern portion of the empire that survived another 1,000 years after Rome itself fell to the Goths in the 5th century. But alas, the Byzantine Empire would come crumbling down as well in 1453. Archaeologist Guy Bar Oz from the University of Haifa was recently looking through the trash of a Byzantine settlement in the Negev desert of Israel. He and his team found that this particular city, called Elusa, fell many years before the empire itself, and was the kind of canary in the coal mine. Research showed that trash disposal, which had originally been a reliable service, stopped in the 6th century. Layers of trash found in an ancient garbage dump showed that the waste had accumulated for about 150 years and then suddenly stopped. This suggests a collapse of infrastructure and a failure of public services. This is almost always what happens before a city is about to implode on itself. What's really interesting is that Elusa began to decline during a long period of peace and stability. The Roman Emperor Justinian was expanding boundaries, everything was going great, and the empire was enjoying seemingly endless success. Yet internally, there was disaster. The infrastructure was failing, almost certainly because of political reasons. This led to an outbreak of disease because trash wasn't carried away. And in a very short span of time, the whole city became a ruin. Even in a time of peace and prosperity, garbage destroyed the city. Cahokia. 1,000 years ago, a great city rose up on the shores of the Mississippi River near what is St. Louis today. The city, called Cahokia, was massive, sprawling for dozens of miles in all directions. It was built of earthen mounds, complete with huge public plazas, large swaths of farmland, and was home to at least 20,000 people. At its peak in the 1100s, it was a larger and more impressive metropolis than Paris. It was a major city, a place where Native Americans came from all over North America to feast, partake in religious ceremonies, and strike it rich. By the year 1350, Cahokia was abandoned. In an incredibly short time, only about 250 years, Cahokia went from being one of the most important cities in North America to a deserted ruin. For decades, researchers have been trying to figure out what happened. The abandonment of Cahokia has been one of the greatest mysteries in North American archaeology. But now it looks like the mystery has been solved. Scientists from the University of Illinois say it was the people of Cahokia who doomed the city to its own destruction. Recent excavations have revealed that Cahokia likely committed ecocide. It destroyed the surrounding environment at such a fast pace that the people in the city were forced to flee. So, what exactly does ecocide mean 1,000 years ago? Scientists say the civilization cut down too many trees in the area. This led to deforestation, erosion, and a sharp increase in unpredictable flooding. They cut down the trees in such a way that when the seasonal rains came, there was nothing to protect them, and they flooded themselves out of their own neighborhoods. The destruction of Berenike. The Hellenistic city of Berenike in Egypt was destroyed by two very different but equally devastating events. This city fell thanks to a combination of volcanic eruptions and drought. But the city was doomed from the start. It was founded in the year 275 BC by Ptolemy II. He was the king of Egypt from between 285 and 246 BC, the second king to rule Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. The city thrived in its first years as a trading port. All kinds of goods were imported from south of the Red Sea, including war elephants. But the city relied too much on the Nile. Less than 100 years after the city was founded, a climactic shift prevented the Nile from flooding like it usually did annually. This resulted in a drought, a major shortage of fresh water, and a sudden failure of the crops. The climactic shift was the result of a volcanic eruption in 209 BC. The eruption caused a sharp decrease in summer rain from the African monsoon. This dried up the Nile, and it devastated every city that relied on the great river for food and life. 2 years after the eruption, a revolt took place against the Ptolemaic dynasty and plunged Egypt into chaos. There was mass famine. The royal family lost control of huge portions of the country, and the city of Berenike could no longer sustain itself and was abandoned. Neolithic immolation. The Neolithic civilization of the Cucuteni Tripilians doomed their own cities on purpose. These ancient Europeans built highly advanced settlements 7,000 years ago in Eastern Europe. These settlements were sophisticated, well-organized, and densely populated. They may very well have been some of the most modern cities of the time, and yet they were purposely destroyed every 60 to 80 years. The civilization would build a city, live in it for just shy of a century, and then burn the whole thing to the ground and relocate. At their new spot, they would build another city and do the same thing over again, ultimately burning it to the ground and starting over. Archaeologists have no notion as to why the civilization purposely destroyed themselves time and time again. They were some of the earliest urbanites, with a total population of an estimated 1 million. They had advanced agricultural production, harvesting everything from wheat to peas. They made pottery, participated in unique art projects, and crafted important objects out of copper. Had they wanted to, they could have built monumental cities and lived in them for thousands of years. Instead, they intentionally burned down their settlements and built new ones. And nobody knows why. The town of Mascali. In the east of Sicily, there is a town called Mascali, situated in the shadow of the great Mount Etna. It's arguably one of the worst places to have a town, especially since it suffered disaster after disaster, pummeled by everything from earthquakes to volcanic eruptions. And yet, despite it being annihilated by lava flows continuously over the centuries, it continues to be built in pretty much the exact same place. Between 1284 and 1285, the whole area was covered in a lava flow that swept across the town and burned everything in its path. When the volcano had finished erupting, the people went back and rebuilt their village. Then it happened again, and again. It happened most recently in November of 1928, when the whole historical center was wiped out by Mount Etna's eruption. And yet, instead of giving up on the historic town, the Sicilians went downstream a little ways and rebuilt it yet again. It's only a matter of time before the volcano blows its top and destroys the village once more. The ancient city of Seuthopolis. In Bulgaria, the ancient city of Seuthopolis is sitting at the bottom of a lake. It was discovered in 1948 during the construction of a local dam. Archaeologists were given 6 years to learn all they could about the ancient Thracian city before the dam was completed and the area was flooded to create the artificial lake. They did what they could, and then the waters came in and buried the city for good. At least, that was what everyone thought. But in 2005, the Bulgarian architect Željko Tilev proposed a plan to preserve and reconstruct the city of Seuthopolis. After all, it is the best preserved Thracian city in Bulgaria. His idea was to build walls around the ruins to keep out the water, then allow tourists to make the journey across the lake by boat to gaze over the walls at the reconstructed city. The project would cost over $50 million, and it hasn't been started yet. But if it's ever completed, it will be the most dramatic revival of a lost city that's ever been done. As for the city itself, it was destroyed in 281 BC when the Celts showed up. The city had made one major mistake that ultimately doomed them. They had, for whatever strange reason, built most of the homes outside the city limits. Instead of having everyone living inside, they opted for an open-air plan that had the residents living in small homes along the outskirts of the city. When the Celts showed up, it wasn't hard for them to kill everyone and burn the city down.
Vilcabamba. Vilcabamba is an ancient Inca city hidden in the dense Amazon jungle. Very few people have ever visited this place, as it's a little more difficult to reach than the more famous Machu Picchu in Peru. And yet, when the lost city of Machu Picchu was discovered in 1911 by explorer Hiram Bingham, he mistook it for Vilcabamba. That's because Vilcabamba was a more legendary city than Machu Picchu, and somewhere modern explorers were desperate to find. When the Spanish invaded Peru in 1529, the Inca Empire was thrown into chaos and anarchy. They were facing a stronger enemy with more advanced technology, and they were unsure how their people were going to survive. In the face of certain doom, the final surviving Inca governors established the city of Vilcabamba as a last refuge in the jungle. As far as history tells us, this was the very last sanctuary of safety for the Inca before they were obliterated by the Spanish. The city was founded in 1536, and it housed the last group of Inca until 1573, when it was abruptly abandoned for unknown reasons. The Spaniards supposedly never found it because it was so deep in the jungle, but it was abandoned all the same. The city of Vilcabamba remained hidden until 1964, when U.S. explorer Jean Savoy found its remains. You can actually visit the site of Vilcabamba today, but it's harder to get to than Machu Picchu. The hike is quite difficult and only recommended for experienced hikers. The path goes all the way from the snow-capped Andean mountains to the jungle, passing through rugged and possibly dangerous terrain. It takes about 12 days, but the good news is that you can also stop by Machu Picchu. Would you do this trek to visit a lost city? Let me know in the comments. Egypt's lost city. One of the greatest discoveries of a lost city happened very recently in Egypt. Archaeologists uncovered the frail remains of a city lost to the desert sands for 3,400 years. When the discovery was made in 2020, it was hailed as the greatest archaeological find in recent Egyptology. To make the discovery even more amazing, it was a complete accident. Famed Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass was searching for the mortuary temple of King Tutankhamun when he uncovered an entire city instead. The city is called Aten, and it's in surprisingly good shape given how old it is. Researchers have already identified workshops, industrial warehouses, residential buildings, administrative quarters, a cemetery, a bakery, and 3 palaces. The city was founded during the reign of one of the most powerful and enigmatic pharaohs in Egyptian history, Amenhotep III. He founded the city between 1386 and 1353 BC, during the decades that the Egyptian kingdom found itself the wealthiest it would ever be. Amenhotep III, also called Amenhotep the Magnificent, was the 9th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He brought Egypt to an unprecedented high on the international stage. Artistic projects flourished, the economy grew, and Egyptian power reached an all-time peak. To commemorate his greatness, the pharaoh established a brand new capital city. But despite all we know, we still don't know that much. The city appears to have risen and then fallen in the blink of an eye. It was definitely established by the pharaoh, but appears to have been abandoned after his death. Then Amenhotep's son, Akhenaten, built his own capital city called Amarna, 250 miles away. Archaeological evidence shows us that Amarna was a massive failure and was also abandoned after Akhenaten's death. For some reason, these wealthy pharaohs all thought they could build their own capitals and grow cities from nothing in the middle of the desert. What we see from these two ancient cities is that founding new towns and forcing people to move to them didn't really work out that well. The economic boom died after Amenhotep, and although his grandson, Tutankhamun, tried to bring the kingdom back together, things took a downward turn, and Egypt began its steep decline to ruin. Trawulan. Trawulan is a lost city in East Java, Indonesia. It's believed to have been the site of a megalithic capital belonging to the Majapahit Empire between the 14th and 15th centuries. But after it was set ablaze following the invasion of a jealous ruler by the name of Girindrawardhana, the city fell into obscurity. The city was rediscovered in the 19th century by the Lieutenant Governor of British Java, Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles. Much of the city has been excavated since then, including a lot of really exciting sites. There is the Candi Tikus, a ritual bathing pool whose name translates to Rat Temple. When archaeologists began to excavate it, the bathing pool was a breeding ground for disease-spreading rats. There is also the impressive gateway of Bajang Ratu, standing an incredible 45 feet tall like the Stargate to an alien world. It's so big that it rivals any other ancient gateway in the world. The ruins of Trawulan are so massive that researchers believe most of the city is still buried underground. Because there have been several volcanic eruptions in the vicinity, perpetrated by Mount Kelud, many of the most important features are likely hidden under several feet of mud and volcanic debris. It hasn't helped that the local Brantas River has flooded multiple times over the centuries, washing away entire sections of the lost capital. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Kenny Pauling and Leroy Jones for supporting this channel. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to join the family. The Lost City of the Snake Kings. Archaeologists recently uncovered a pair of mysterious tombs in the ancient city of Holmul. The city dates back to the height of the Maya civilization between 650 and 700 AD, located about 300 miles north of Guatemala City in the jungle. The first of the new tombs was found inside a pyramid, with the remains of a middle-aged individual buried there with shiny jade inlaid teeth. The person was also buried with an inscribed human tibia bone, which may have belonged either to a relative or a prisoner of war. Whatever the case, the person buried in the tomb must have been extremely important. Archaeologists just haven't figured out who it is yet. The second mysterious tomb found in the city was also in a pyramid and included jade funerary goods and a necklace that may have been a war trophy. Researchers believe the jade necklace in the tomb was stolen from a king of another city. The snake-headed emblem on the artifact suggests it belonged to one of the mysterious snake kings of the Maya civilization. The snake kings were part of a family that ruled a large portion of the Maya Empire just before its collapse. The tombs are just two discoveries in the city of Holmul, which at its peak would have been a truly breathtaking place. The city was decorated with multiple pyramids, tiered temples, and large open plazas where citizens gathered for ceremonies and rituals. Cohaito. There is a very small country in Africa that many people have never heard of. It's called Eritrea, and it's located to the north of Ethiopia. Thousands of years ago, Eritrea was home to a great city called Cohaito, whose ruins have only recently been discovered. The city was built on a plateau at the edge of the Great Rift Valley, standing 8,000 feet above sea level. It was practically a city in the sky and prospered long before the Aksumite Kingdom of Ethiopia ever came into existence. Researchers believe the people of Cohaito may have been the predecessors of the Aksumites, who appeared around 100 AD and flourished for 600 years. Cohaito was a mighty city with a widespread influence, reaching all the way to Sudan and even parts of the Arabian Peninsula. This city likely had strong trading relations with the Romans and the Byzantine Empire, and there were presumably a lot more cities spread throughout the North African deserts. However, time has not been kind to these cities. Cohaito itself is little more than some broken pieces of stone and a handful of columns that haven't fallen over yet. But over 2,000 years ago, this city was grand. It had big markets, it was surrounded by small hamlets, and there was constant caravan traffic. This city survived when the Aksumite Empire began to flex their muscles. However, both cities, Cohaito and Aksum, were abandoned around 900 AD and lost for centuries. It wasn't until foreigners began traveling through these regions in the 19th century that the ruins of Cohaito were discovered being blown away by the wind. Audaghost. Audaghost is an ancient Berber town found in the wasteland of the Sahara Desert, not far from Timbuktu. It was an important center for trade in the medieval days, frequented by merchants traveling along the trans-Saharan trade routes. Here, North African traders purchased gold from the mighty kings of Ghana and sent other goods across the known world. The site is now entirely destroyed, but once stood on the current ruin of Tegdaust in Mauritania. The builders of the city were Berbers, the natural descendants of prehistoric North Africans. Since the beginning of human civilization, these people have lived in far-flung communities from Morocco to Egypt and all the way south to Niger. The two largest remaining populations can be found today in Algeria and Morocco, with an estimated 1/4 of the entire Algerian population still having Berber blood in their veins. These were the original people of the Sahara, already spread across the globe by 2000 BC. They were living in ancient Greece, Carthage, Rome, and only began to be truly suppressed during the Arab conquests of the 7th century. The city of Audaghost was just one of the towns they built in these shifting desert sands. Ancient Carthage. Carthage was once the biggest, richest, and most powerful city-state in all of the Mediterranean. It was first called Kart-Hadasht by the Phoenicians, then Carchedon by the Greeks, and finally Carthago by the Romans. Much of what we know about the city comes from the Romans, who went to war with Carthage between 264 and 146 BC, ultimately destroying the city-state, which was located in modern-day Tunis on the northern coast of Africa. Legend tells us it was founded in 814 BC by the Phoenician queen Dido. About 500 years later, the city expanded because of an influx of refugees fleeing Alexander the Great's conquests in 332 BC. The city then continued to expand until it became the seat of an empire, with their own colonies as far away as Sicily and Spain. The history of Carthage is as complex and difficult to explain as the history of Rome. It existed in 5 periods. There was ancient Carthage, then Carthage occupied by the Romans until 439 AD. The Vandals took the city until 534, then the Byzantines until 698. And lastly, the Muslim Arabs conquered Carthage and held the city until 1270. That was around the time it fully lost power, although it continued to be inhabited. The ancient ruins were entirely ignored until modern archaeologists started excavating in the 1830s. Ciudad Perdida. Colombia has its very own lost city called Ciudad Perdida, which translates literally to Lost City. It was founded in 800 AD, 1200 years ago, by a pre-Columbian culture called Tairona. They occupied the region about 700 years earlier, starting in the first millennium AD by building small settlements throughout the jungle. But as their culture grew and their technological advances continued, they made greater and greater settlements. Ciudad Perdida was one of their shining achievements, positioned on a mountain in the jungle and once hosting an estimated 3,000 citizens. Archaeologists have discovered over 200 structures here, mostly built from wood and spread out across 169 terraces. These terraces are on the plateaus of the mountain, each one connected by a network of paved roads and small plazas. The exact details of the Tairona culture are unknown to scientists. Their spectacular city in the jungle was abandoned in the 16th century after the arrival of the Spanish, then nearly erased by the growing jungle. Nobody knows why the people abandoned their city, although it doesn't appear to have anything to do with the Spanish. When Spanish explorer Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo arrived in Santa Marta in 1498, they were already in the process of disappearing. Etzanoa. The lost city of Etzanoa was only recently discovered in Kansas and may have once been a thriving metropolis occupied by Native Americans. Its ruins were uncovered on the banks of the Walnut River, inside the modern Arkansas City. Researchers say that over 1,000 years ago, there may have been 20,000 indigenous people living here. Etzanoa is believed to have been the largest Native American city ever. Dr. Donald Blakesley from Wichita State University is the man behind the research. He has been working on archaeological digs in Arkansas City in an attempt to reveal the history of the Etzanoa culture. He and his team have discovered pottery shards, arrowheads, and many other artifacts buried on private land. But by far the most amazing discovery has been the city of Etzanoa itself. So far as Blakesley and his team can figure out, the natives lived here starting around 1450 and up until the 1700s. They occupied several counties and were also partly nomadic, with the population of the city fluctuating depending on the season. Unfortunately, more details are hard to find because most of the lost city is buried under modern houses, businesses, and paved roads. Arkansas City is built directly over the ruins of Etzanoa City. Sanchi. Sanchi wasn't an ordinary city. It was a Buddhist capital most famous for the Great Stupa, which sits upon a hilltop in the state of Madhya Pradesh in India. The Great Stupa is one of the oldest stone structures anywhere on the subcontinent. It was built as an important monument in the 3rd century BC by the mighty Emperor Ashoka the Great. Researchers believe the original stupa was a modest brick structure built over relics of the Buddha himself. It was intended as a shelter for the artifacts and was improved upon over the years by other emperors until it became the megalithic structure that we know today. Sanchi itself has a pretty mysterious history. This city was supposedly the birthplace of Ashoka's wife, Devi, who was the daughter of a merchant. It was also the city in which the emperor and his wife were married. Starting in the 3rd century BC with the Great Stupa, Sanchi took on a role as a religious sanctuary. Over the centuries, countless stupas, Buddhist monuments, and other religious buildings cropped up inside the city and around its general area. The landscape is so littered with ancient Indian architecture and Buddhist structures that archaeologists are still making new discoveries to this very day.
Valhalla. There was one very special thing that made the Viking warriors of the Middle Ages so scary: their belief in Valhalla. In Norse mythology, Valhalla is the hall of slain warriors in the afterlife, literally translated to Hall of the Slain. Vikings believed that if they died valiantly in battle, they would be selected by Odin's Valkyries to sit in the Great Hall with all the legendary warriors of old. It was also believed that when it came time for the apocalypse, what the Vikings called Ragnarok, the eternal warriors in Valhalla would rise up to fight against the forces of chaos. But could Valhalla be a real place right here on Earth? The answer is a little more complicated than you might think. It has a lot to do with the word itself. Valhalla comes from the Norse Valhall, with the hall part being a reference to a rock. Many scholars believe the original meaning of Valhall was Rock of the Slain. In the original days of Norse mythology, when the myths were still being created, the Valkyries were demons of death who carried fallen warriors to an eternal battlefield. Over the years, the Rock of the Slain changed to the Hall of the Slain, and Valhall to Valhalla. But if there was a real place on this planet that inspired the tale of Valhalla, where would it be? Some have speculated there may have been a great battle once, an unknown ancient fight so massive that it went down in history as a legend. The location of the battle, likely waged in the mountains, became the Rock of the Slain. Warriors told stories of it so much that it got incorporated into their myths, becoming a place where all warriors wished to fight. Arcadia. Arcadia is both a real location in modern Greece and a mythological place from Greek mythology. The legendary Arcadia was supposedly located in the Peloponnese Peninsula in southern Greece. According to the myths, Arcadia was a mysterious place home to mythical creatures, tree spirits, centaurs, living trees known as dryads, and gods and goddesses. The main god who lived in Arcadia was Pan, lord of the wilderness. Hermes also happened to live in Arcadia, god of thieves. In the stories, Arcadia was paradise. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of Eden, an untouched wilderness rich in green forests, colorful flowers, delicious plants, and babbling brooks. But Arcadia was also dangerous. It was a beautiful place on paper, but any human who wandered too deep into the wilderness found themselves in a vast swamp. The deeper, darker depths of the woods were home to horrible creatures, such as the giant birds whose beaks were made of bronze and their feathers made of sharp metal. What's really interesting is that Arcadia, the real one, isn't that much different from the legendary Arcadia. The real-life Arcadia is a region of heavily forested mountains, a place sparsely populated and rarely ever conquered. Because of its unique landscape and deep valleys, humans have generally stayed away. In all likelihood, the legendary forest and its frightening monsters was likely inspired by the same wilderness. It's shoutout time! I want to say a big thank you to Elizabeth Warman and Mo Hudspeth for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Shambhala. Shambhala is an old Sanskrit word that means place of peace. It's a mythical paradise that can be found mentioned in many texts from the ancient world. Shambhala is mentioned in Tibetan Buddhism and in mysterious pieces of scripture from the Zhangjiang culture. The Zhangjiang came before the Tibetan Buddhists, and according to them, Shambhala was a land where only those with the purest of hearts could live. Only someone who managed to achieve enlightenment could find the magical land of Shambhala. In the Buddhist myths that came later, Shambhala grew to be a kingdom where only those with love and wisdom in their heart were able to live, and where the people never suffered, wanted for anything, or grew old. The truth is that throughout the centuries, Shambhala has gone by many names: the Forbidden Land, the Land of Radiant Spirits, the Land of Living Gods. The list goes on and on. In Hindu mythology, they call it Aryavartha, which means the land of the worthy ones. In Chinese mythology, the place is called Xitian. Even the Russians have their own version of Shambhala called Belovoide. Stories of a mythical land of peace and harmony have been told by cultures throughout Asia for thousands of years. Nobody even knows who the first culture was that came up with the idea of such a place. And this brings us to the big question: was Shambhala ever a real place? Unfortunately, the answer is most likely not. Explorers have been looking for the physical location for centuries. Even the Nazis allegedly sent expeditions to Tibet in search of Shambhala, but nobody has ever found it. Do you think it truly exists? Let me know in the comments. Rama Setu. Rama Setu, or Adam's Bridge, is a real place of incredible mystery. It is the remnant of a land bridge that once connected India and Sri Lanka. Just a few thousand years ago, you would have been able to walk from the southern tip of India over the bridge and arrive on the northern tip of Sri Lanka. Geologists say the bridge, which is a narrow stretch of mostly submerged dirt and rock, is nothing to get that excited about. They say the Rama Setu has nothing to do with legends or mythologies. They say it's just a geological formation, as ordinary as any piece of land on the planet. Wow, way to make it special. Researchers are always taking the magic out of things, but good news is that might not be the case. The bridge itself is impressive, 30 miles long and about 3 feet underwater in most places. What's really interesting is that the bridge has never been comprehensively studied. Scientists can speculate all they want, but there is insufficient evidence to say whether Adam's Bridge is entirely natural or it was built. Some geologists have estimated the rocks in the center of the bridge to be about 7,000 years old, with the sandbar at either side only 4,000 years old. This would imply that rocks were brought from somewhere else to create the bridge. In Hindu legend, Rama Setu was a bridge built by the god Rama with help from an army of monkeys. The bridge was made so that Rama could reach the island and save his wife Sita, who had been taken there. Local records claim the bridge was walkable up until the 15th century. A cyclone finally destroyed what little remained of the bridge in 1480, and the whole thing sank underwater. The Valley of Diamonds. Sinbad the Sailor is one of history's favorite adventurers. Tales of Sinbad began to circulate in the world of Islam at around the same time tales of King Arthur appeared in England. In the stories, Sinbad comes from somewhere near Baghdad in the 8th century AD, during the rule of the Abbasid Caliphate. He then goes on 7 voyages around the seas of Africa and Asia. Sinbad has lots of adventures. He fights magical beings, and he encounters tons of monsters. Historians generally agree the hero Sinbad was a fictional character, not a real man. But that's nothing but speculation. There is no surefire way to say if the Persian adventurer, introduced in Arabian Nights alongside heroes like Ali Baba and Aladdin, was based on a real historical figure or not. There is one rather remarkable story in the Epic of Sinbad. In the tale, Sinbad becomes stranded on a seemingly deserted island. There are a few fantastic things that happen, like Sinbad fighting a monstrous bird and getting into a battle with giant snakes. But at one point, he comes across a valley, with the floor of this valley covered in diamonds. There are so many precious gemstones that Sinbad was able to purchase himself a whole fleet of ships. Many have speculated the legendary Valley of Diamonds may have been a real place, perhaps in India, since that was where diamonds were first found on the bottoms of riverbeds. Do you believe Sinbad the Sailor and the Valley of Diamonds were real? Let me know in the comments. The Island of California. The Island of California is a legendary cartographical error. It's gone down in history as one of the biggest mapping mistakes ever, and it all began in the 16th century. In the early days of American exploration, no one could decide if Baja California was an island, a peninsula, or attached to mainland North America. Maps in the 16th century showed Baja California as a massive island separated by a strait of water. For some bizarre reason, the cartographic error continued into the 17th and 18th centuries. Even though explorers were adamant that Baja California was indeed connected to the mainland, it kept showing up in maps as an island. Then things started to get weird. People began to confuse the island of California with legends of places like the Garden of Eden and Atlantis. Rumors spread through Europe that there was a magical island paradise off the western coast of North America. Explorers did eventually create proper maps, and the island of California's legend was put to bed, but it took a really long time. In Stanford's Glenn McLaughlin collection of California, there are over 1,000 maps showing California as an island. One of the weirdest descriptions came from 1510, when Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo described the island of California as a terrestrial paradise where people live like the Amazons. Mag Mell. Mag Mell is a mythical utopia from Irish mythology. It was really the Irish version of Greece's Arcadia and Asia's Shambhala. In the Irish legends, Mag Mell is described as an island somewhere to the west of Ireland. The Irish believed it to be a real physical place, but only accessible to certain individuals. And like the other utopias from ancient lore, Mag Mell was without pain, suffering, or hunger. Those who managed to reach the mythical island enjoy eternal life and all pleasurable pursuits imaginable. For the Irish, Mag Mell was truly heaven on earth. Legends also say that Mag Mell was ruled by King Tethra of the Fomorians. This was a little bizarre because most mythical utopias didn't have human rulers. These were supposed to be otherworldly places without kings and queens, where everyone was equally young and beautiful. This has led many scholars to wonder if there wasn't indeed an island somewhere near the Irish coast ruled by a small, youthful, and exceptionally beautiful group. In later years, after Ireland had given up paganism for Christianity, the stories of Mag Mell changed. It shifted from a mythical utopia to a real island, one supposedly visited by explorers traveling across the Atlantic. Would you like to visit Magmal? Let us know in the comments. Fusang. Fusang is described in ancient Chinese literature as a mythical place somewhere east of China. The legend began about 1,500 years ago, thanks to Buddhist missionary Hui Shen. He claimed there was a vast land, which he called Fusang, extremely far to the east. It was so far that it could only be North America. British historian Joseph Needham tried to identify Fusang as the Buryat region of Siberia. However, many think Fusang was a city or land in North America populated by Native Americans. This would have been about 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus arrived in North America. It would also have been about 500 years before the Vikings landed in Canada. According to the legend, the Buddhist missionary arrived in China in 450 AD, then traveled by ship to Fusang. He didn't return until 499, at which point he reported his discovery to the Chinese emperor. Everything the missionary said was written down, so we know his claims were at least somewhat legitimate. The missionary did indeed discover a mysterious land. We just don't know if it was North America, an unknown island civilization, or perhaps Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. What do you think? Were the Chinese maybe the first ones to discover America? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Antillia. In the 15th century, Venetian cartographer Zuane Pizzigano created a chart showing a mysterious group of islands. These islands are known as the Antillia group, with the biggest and most important being Antillia itself, also called the Isle of Seven Cities. The map shows Western Europe, Northwest Africa, and a huge chunk of the North Atlantic Ocean. The chart even has the Madeira Islands on it, found by Portuguese sailors in 1419. It also shows the Azores archipelago, not discovered until about 1431. That was almost a decade after Pizzigano made his chart in 1424. The biggest issue with this ancient map is that the islands it shows likely don't even exist. No living human has ever laid eyes on the island of Antillia, and yet its history somehow goes back to the 8th century AD. According to local legends in Spain, Antillia was settled by a group of 7 Visigoth bishops. When the Muslims came and conquered Hispania in 714, a group of powerful Visigoths fled and established 7 settlements on the island. There was one for each bishop. But that's as far as the tale goes. We don't know what happened to the bishops or their cities, and no trace of Antillia has ever been found. We only have the island's name on a random map made 600 years ago. Seliwig. Before King Arthur held court at Camelot, he held court in a mythical place called Seliwig or Cashewig. In the ancient Welsh tale Culhwch and Olwen, dated to the 11th century, King Arthur is mentioned for the very first time. This is about 100 years before King Arthur became really famous, with the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth, who had King Arthur ruling over Camelot. But in this original text, a story significantly older, King Arthur lives in Seliwig. The name translates roughly to Forest Grove. Nobody knows where this place may have been. However, Seliwig was likely a real stronghold. People knew about it because the name continued to pop up in random pieces of text all through the Middle Ages. There are even Welsh manuscripts from as recently as the 1800s that mention Seliwig as the throne of Cornwall. It's difficult to know what to make of all this. The ancient account of King Arthur from 1,000 years ago seems to suggest he was definitely a real historical figure. But rather than living in Camelot and being assisted by a wizard, he may have ruled from a modest throne somewhere in Cornwall. If Forest Grove is any indication, the stronghold may have been hidden somewhere deep in the woods. Do you think King Arthur was a real hero or some make-believe character? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Ancient Roman military camps. Archaeologists have discovered a trio of ancient Roman camps that were lost in the Jordanian desert. It's believed these isolated camps were part of a secret military mission that went down in the 2nd century. The physical remains of the camps are long gone, but archaeologists use satellite images to find the scars the settlements left on the ground. The camps don't look like anything today, and there is nothing left but the rectangular outline of where the walls once stood. There are no buildings or ruins, and not so much as a stray brick can be found at the site. Scientists might find some artifacts, though, if they ever decide to excavate. But as of right now, the Roman camps are so deep in the desert, archaeologists haven't been able to physically visit them. Michael Fradley from the University of Oxford spotted all 3 Roman camps within 24 hours of searching the satellite images from Google Earth. The positioning of the camps suggests that they were military in nature. They were built following the standard Roman defensive plan, and the camps are hardly within a day's walk of each other, between 23 and 27 miles apart. If the Romans were under attack, they would have been able to retreat to one of their other camps as they regrouped and rallied a defense. In the 2nd century AD, the Romans didn't control this part of the desert. It was ruled by the Nabateans, Roman allies who controlled the spice trade from their capital at Petra. Remember Petra? The Roman camps suggest a secret mission to infiltrate the region and launch a surprise attack. And in the end, the Romans did eventually conquer the Nabateans. This may have been a precursor to the full invasion, a secret mission to destabilize the kingdom. And it was such a covert operation that there are no Roman records of it ever occurring. Any Roman military buffs out there? What do you think about this discovery? Chittorgarh Fort. Chittorgarh Fort is one of the biggest and most formidable ancient fortresses in India. The walls of the fortification stretch along the edge of a massive hilltop that stands 590 feet above the land below. The fort offers amazing views of the plains spreading outward from the valley, and it contains a whopping 65 historic structures. There are 4 different palaces here and over a dozen temples. And there are also artificial lakes and tall towers that were built to commemorate long-forgotten victories. It's not exactly clear when the fortress was built, but some have estimated there was a military structure here almost 2,000 years ago. Folk legend says the fortress was built by the legendary hero Bhima. What we do know based on historical records is that the fortress was captured by Bappa Rawal, the Guhila ruler, around 728 AD. The fort saw a lot of action through the ages and was conquered by Al-Din Khalji in 1303 with his great army. The siege lasted 8 months, but finally Al-Din and his men won, and afterward the Guhila ruler supposedly ordered the massacre of 30,000 Hindus in the city. The fortress began to decline in 1616 with the peace treaty between the Mughals and the Rajputs, but it was built to last, and still stands as one of the most impressive and powerful fortresses ever built. Big shout out to Ginny D and Leela Croesus and the Moon. Thanks so much for your nice comments. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family, because why not? The Towers of Silence. The Zoroastrian Towers of Silence in Iran were in use until about 40 years ago. For 3,000 long years, these towers were used by followers of the Zoroastrian religion as sacred pillars of decontamination. Up until 4 decades ago, corpses could be found at the tops of the towers. These human remains were then picked apart by desert vultures, and gradually, they turned into skeletons. It sounds brutal, but it's all part of Zoroastrian tradition. When a follower of the religion dies, their body is believed to be immediately susceptible to contamination by demons. To stop demons and evil spirits from sneaking into the body, the corpse must be purified on a tower known as a dakmas in the desert. These bodies are left until the bones are bleached and not a single strip of flesh remains. After that, the bones are placed inside an ossuary, where it's believed the deceased can finally rest at peace. Zoroastrianism continued in Iran, its birthplace, and in India until very recently. Although it's still practiced in small groups, the Towers of Silence are now forbidden. Since the 1970s, using dakmas has been illegal. Many Zoroastrian communities are now burying their bodies under concrete to try and stop the demons from infesting the corpses. The Towers of Silence are some of the few remaining dakmas that are still around today. There are no more bodies on the towers now. but they are still considered to be extremely powerful places. Isca Augusta. The Isca Augusta was founded 2,000 years ago in 74 AD by the governor of Britain, shortly after the invasion of Britain by the Romans, at a point when the invaders were still having a tough time subjugating the native tribes. You know how it goes. The governor, Sextus Julius Frontinus, commissioned the construction of a powerful military base to help put an end to the rebellious tribes in Wales. What started as a small military outpost grew to be one of the only 3 permanent fortresses in Britannia, back when it was a Roman province. It was the main headquarters of Augustus's Second Legion, which had been around since the Roman Republic. Augustus's Second Legion, also called Legio II Augusta in Latin, had fought valiantly across Europe. They campaigned across the Cantabrian Wars, fought against the Germanic tribes, and were chosen to help invade and conquer Britannia. The Isca Augusta was their home base. It covered 50 acres and was outlined by tall stone walls and support towers. From the base, legions marched into Wales and slowly but surely brought the population under their control. Sadly, the fortress is in ruins today. It remained in use until about 300 AD and then was abruptly demolished. Historians think it was the result of Electus's rebellion, when the usurper emperor tried to seize power from the Romans and attempted to take back Britannia. A handful of people lived in these structures until around 380 AD, but the Isca Augusta never saw the Roman military return. These days, it's mostly grown over with bright green grass. So you kind of have to use your imagination. The Prince's House. Archaeologists in Japan recently excavated the proposed building site for a new apartment building, and during their excavation, they made an unexpected discovery. They found the remains of the home of an 8th century prince. The royal residence was located in the area of Heijō-kyo, the capital of Japan, from 710 to 784 AD during the Nara period. Prince Toneri was born in 676 AD into the Japanese imperial family. He was the son of Emperor Tenmu and Empress Jito, although he never made it to the throne. His older sister would eventually become the empress, while Toneri took a more religious path. He became a huge patron of Buddhism and constructed temples all throughout the Nara region. He was also the man behind the famous Yakushi-ji Temple. To find the prince's house at a construction site is a stroke of serious luck, but this wasn't any ordinary house. It was a mighty imperial residence. Archaeologists found the remains of giant pillars used to support the immense ceilings of multiple buildings on the property. Toshihide Omi, the chief senior specialist with the Cultural Affairs Agency, says it looks as if the prince's residence was at the very center of the capital. It was a fortress situated in the middle of the city. Unfortunately, though, construction on the new apartment complex will continue, so the remains of the residential palace will be buried under a heap of concrete. Fairy tale over. Greek naval base. Archaeologists in Greece have discovered the remains of an ancient naval base on the island of Salamis. They found the presence of a military harbor, a place where one of the most epic military naval battles of antiquity was fought. The harbor is located in the Bay of Ambilaki. 2 Greek universities joined forces in picking apart the harbor in search of archaeological remains. It was the first underwater reconnaissance that was initiated by institutions in Greece, and it turned up a lot of great stuff. They found structures, the remnants of defensive walls, and buildings from the 5th century BC. Some of the features can even be seen at low tide from the shore, so they weren't a huge surprise. But with all these archaeologists working together, they were able to paint a comprehensive picture of the ancient naval base. The experts say this was likely a closed military zone 2,500 years ago. It was protected by a massive wall that extended over 200 feet and was dotted with defensive towers. There were also breakwaters and launch areas for boats, which means the entire harbor was fortified and ready for defense. The archaeologists think this could have been the staging area for the battle between the Greek navy and King Xerxes' Persian fleet in 480 BC. Themistocles lured the Persians into the strait between Salamis and the Greek mainland and utterly annihilated them, and the defeat of Xerxes ushered in the golden age of Athens. Bunratty Castle. Bunratty Castle began as a Viking trading camp in 970.
The structure still standing right now is the final form of the castle, the very last in a long series of castles to be built on the exact same spot. Following the Viking trading camp, Robert de Musegros built a defensive fortress here in 1250. It was primarily built of wood, with a wooden tower that offered an exceptional view of the surrounding countryside. Then, when his lands were later transferred to Thomas de Clare, the new owner tore down the old wooden castle and built a new one out of stone. The construction of the stone castle drew peasants to the area, and soon a town had established itself around the stronghold. The town of Bunratty grew, and around 1425, the McNamara clan built the third Bunratty Castle. The fourth castle came 50 years later when the O'Briens took over and turned it into a true stronghold. They also cleared the area around the castle and transformed it into a beautiful garden. There were once said to be over 3,000 deer that lived peacefully within the confines of this garden. The castle is a fantastic example of Irish architecture. It still stands proudly with its 3 main floors and turrets intact, and the dungeon is still ready to accept prisoners. The Great Hall is located on the top floor, and it was once used to hold audience with the Earls of Thomond. The castle changed ownership frequently between the 15th century and now, and it was only restored to its former glory in 1945 by Lord Gort. Now it serves as a tourist attraction and is one of the finest and most exceptional castles in all of Ireland. What do you think? Do you want to visit this castle? Let me know in the comments below. The Lost Fortlet. From Ireland, let's go to Scotland. A lost Roman fortlet has been identified in rural Scotland. On the edge of the Antonine Wall, which once stood as a border fortification against the rebellious Scottish tribes, the Roman fortlet marked the edge of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. We already know the Romans invaded Britain, but what gets a lot less attention is the invasion of Scotland in 43 AD. The Romans conquered the area we now call England fairly easily. But when Emperor Claudius and his army tried to push into Scotland, they received unanticipated resistance. The Caledonians were especially fierce, so there really wasn't much the Romans could do because they had already reached their limits. The army then built the Antonine Wall in 142 AD after a century of little progress. This marked the edge of their empire and the edge of their influence, and it was the farthest the Roman Empire would ever expand in the West. All along the Antonine Wall were established primary forts and smaller fortlets. These were military bases where soldiers defended against any invasions by the Scots to the north. Most of these army strongholds are long gone, but it was only recently that researchers with Historic Environment Scotland were able to discover one of the ruined fortlets thanks to new advances in technology. They used high-tech gradiometry to uncover the location of the fort that they'd failed to find since the 1970s. It's nothing but an overgrown hill now, but it's still exciting to know where the fortlet originally stood. The Giza Barracks. Archaeologists have found the ruins of a military barracks in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the remains of a bustling port and a barracks that once housed military troops or sailors were discovered. And all of this was located just a stone's throw away from the world's most famous ancient monument. It's believed that the barracks was in use during the construction of the pyramids 4,500 years ago. The modern city of Cairo pushes against the Giza Plateau today. But during antiquity, there was a town at the edge of the pyramids called Kentkawis. Previous discoveries have already shown that it was likely a thriving port. Thousands of years ago, there was a lot more water here, and the pyramids were accessible by canals coming in from the Nile. Giza and the surrounding towns like Kentkawis were part of the same major port for 3 generations under the reigns of pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. These were the pharaohs who each built one of the 3 Great Pyramids. Archaeologists found a series of long buildings that may have been used to house sailors or soldiers during the reign of these 3 legendary pharaohs. Each building is about 23 feet tall and 113 feet long. The troops or sailors held here likely went on voyages up the Nile to fight in wars. They may have even been stationed here to guard important people when they came to Giza. But in all honesty, nobody can say for sure. All we know is that there were hundreds of soldiers stationed here throughout the construction of all the pyramids in Egypt. The military and Armageddon. Armageddon is a city in Israel. It's an ancient place, a biblical site where the final battle for humanity will supposedly take place. The Christian Bible claims the armies of the world will meet at Armageddon, and the last battle will be fought at the end of times. The name itself, Armageddon, has become another word for the apocalypse, but you probably already knew that. Archaeologist Gottlieb Schumacher was the first to excavate the city in 1902. During his work, he uncovered the remains of an amphitheater. It was a circular depression in the earth, which he thought was an ordinary amphitheater, likely constructed by the Romans. But over 100 years later, in 2013, a team of researchers excavated the same circular depression and made a shocking revelation. They discovered the walls and foundations of what was once the administrative center for the 6th Ironclad Legion of Rome. It was a military amphitheater occupied by the Roman Republic after they'd conquered the Jews and turned Judea into their own personal province in 63 BC. But why would the Romans have an amphitheater for their military base? Researchers suggest it was because they were strange people in a strange land. The military amphitheater was way smaller than a civic amphitheater like the Colosseum. It was used for both training and fun. And because the soldiers were occupying a foreign land far from their own home, they needed a way to entertain themselves. They didn't speak the local language, so they played games and put on their own entertainment events to keep themselves busy.
The crash in the Amazon. This story is incredible and very recent, so I'll tell you this one first. 4 children have just survived 40 days lost in the brutal and unforgiving wilderness of the Amazon jungle. Leslie, Soleil, Tian, and Kristen were discovered by a rescue operation in mid-June. Rescue operators searched through over 1,600 miles of seemingly endless, dense jungle in a huge rescue codenamed Operation Hope. The oldest of the 4 children, Leslie, is only 13 years old. The youngest was just 11 months old. The children have been airlifted by Colombian special forces to the capital city of Bogotá. Everyone in Colombia and the world was shocked and thrilled that the children were found alive after the incredible ordeal of not only surviving a plane crash, but the challenges of the jungle. But there are so many questions. The main one is, how could they have possibly survived? General Pedro Sanchez, the leader of Operation Hope to find the children, said they had the will to live. They are also indigenous people from the Huitoto tribe, so they had immunity to many of the hazards that would kill other people in the jungle. Their ancestors have been living in the Amazon for thousands of years. They aren't going to get as sick the way an outsider would. And also, the general said the children knew the jungle. It's practically in their blood, so they recognize what they could eat. But still, it wasn't easy for the children who were able to live through something that would be practically impossible for most adults. But what happened to them in the first place? The children were traveling with their mother from a small village in the Amazon to another town to visit their father. The father said that they were escaping a guerrilla group who had threatened to take him and the children to turn them into soldiers. So they boarded a single-engine Cessna, a typical bush plane used to get around in the Amazon. On May 1st, 2023, the plane crashed. Its nose hit the dense undergrowth in a fireball of twisted metal. When rescue operators discovered the wreckage 16 days later, the bodies of 3 adults were there, but not the children. The Colombian military joined forces with indigenous guides to search for them, filled with hope that they were still alive. In later interviews, the children said their mother had survived for 4 days after the crash, but got worse and told them to leave to save themselves. Rescue operators say the kids stuck around the plane as long as they could. They ate what little food was in the Cessna, then went in search of more. NPR reports that the children probably abandoned the crash site to get away from the dead bodies, which could attract dangerous animals, and also to look for food and water. The military and indigenous volunteers used everything at their disposal: reconnaissance flights, infrared sensors, but the jungle was so thick it was easy to get lost. It was constantly raining, and they said they were wet the whole time. Thanks to their upbringing and resourcefulness, the children were able to eat, protect themselves with tarps and mosquito nets, and even performed ceremonies, all while carrying around an 11-month-old baby. The children were able to feed the baby yucca flower mixed with water. They climbed trees for fruit and seeds,
And they also found a box of food airdropped by the military. During this time, the baby turned a year old, and another brother turned 5 years old. The military played a message from the children's grandmother over and over so they wouldn't hide. But it wasn't until a Belgian shepherd rescue dog named Wilson found the children that they were officially rescued. They were weak and fragile with their clothes in tatters. They were wrapped in blankets, and the rest is history. Wilson, however, has now gone missing, and a formal search is underway to find him. And now for number 9. But first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Da for the generous super thanks. Be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family, and let us know if you'd be able to survive in the jungle in the comments below. Cliff Fall. On July 6, 2018, Angela Hernandez from Oregon took a trip through California's Big Sur. She was driving her SUV along the highway when a small animal suddenly jumped in front of her vehicle. Angela, being a kind and loving human, swerved to avoid hitting the poor creature. Thing is, you are never supposed to swerve for a small animal. I hate to say it, but that's what they teach you. And this is why. She was in a bad place on the road, right next to a massive cliff. Angela's kind-hearted instincts caused her to plunge off the side of a cliff. Her SUV plummeted 250 feet onto the rocky shores of California. Angela was in rough shape when the SUV hit the sand. She blacked out and woke up with the SUV slowly filling with water. She was covered in blood and horribly injured. Angela barely managed to pull herself out of the wreckage before she drowned. But she did, and she moved away from the vehicle thinking the worst was over. Angela was very wrong. Although she was only 250 feet from the busy highway, she might as well have been on the moon. The vehicles driving way up on the road couldn't see her, and nobody could hear her screams. She spent days injured on a desolate stretch of sand and fog, thinking she was going to die down there. On the 3rd day, Angela realized she was dehydrated. She had to use a radiator hose to siphon fresh water spilling out of a crack in the cliff. She thought about trying to walk out, but was stuck on a tiny patch of rocky land with nowhere to go. Her legs were too badly damaged anyway. She would have only been able to crawl. After 7 days stuck on the rocks, Angela was finally saved by a complete coincidence. A couple happened to be hiking along the remote beach and heard her desperate cries for help. The Vietnamese Tarzan. In 1972, a man named Phan lost half his family during the Vietnam War. A bomb was dropped on Phan's village, destroying everything. Fearing for his life and the life of his 2-year-old son, Phan retreated into the Vietnamese jungle. He spent the next 41 years surviving off plants and wild animals. Phan and his son Lang survived in a timber hut built 15 feet off the forest floor. According to one of the man's close friends, explorer Alvaro Cerezo, Phan feared leaving the jungle. He believed the Vietnam War would never end, so he stayed in the forest, living like it was prehistoric times. He and his son only left the jungle a few years ago when they were officially discovered. They emerged wearing loincloths made from tree bark, and Phan's son Lang could barely speak a word of any language. He hardly knew how to communicate and didn't even know women existed. This story raises so many questions, like why didn't Phan teach his child to speak? Or at least give him a simple basic education? And what kind of adventures did they have? They must have been through a lot. Phan was dubbed the Vietnamese Tarzan. In 2017, Phan died at the age of 86. He had been persuaded to return to the village he originally left all those years ago. But after arriving, Phan's health quickly deteriorated. Lang took to civilized life okay, especially after seeing his first woman at 43 years old, according to reports. He worked on a farm and bonded with a few of his family members still living there, including nieces and nephews. But it wasn't long before Lang was diagnosed with untreatable liver cancer. It's believed Lang's cancer was caused by his introduction to society. He started to drink alcohol and eat processed food. Lang also came under the stresses of modern society. In 2021, Lang passed away. Some speculate he may have lived another 30 years had he continued to live alone in the jungle. What do you think? Is it better to live in modern society, or is there something to be said for living in the jungle alone? Let me know in the comments. Catch up at sea. Elvis Francois spent 24 days drifting through the Caribbean Sea. Elvis, who hails from the island nation of Dominica, was making repairs to his small sailboat near the island of Saint Martin in December of 2022. Suddenly, out of nowhere, things took a terrible turn. He hadn't been planning on going out to sea. He was just trying to fix his boat. A sudden storm pushed Elvis's boat out into the sea, and he began to drift way too far from land. Elvis doesn't have any notable navigational skills. He knows how to use a boat, but he doesn't know how to navigate at sea. So he failed to get his boat back to shore as the weather pushed him deeper and deeper into the unknown. Soon enough, he was surrounded by nothing but the open ocean. Elvis was completely disoriented. He had nobody to talk to and no way to call for help. But he did have some ketchup, which helped Elvis survive. In January, Elvis Francois was discovered 120 nautical miles from Puerto Bolívar in Colombia. A plane flying overhead noticed the word "help" carved into the side of the sailboat. Elvis may not have known how to find land, but at least he understood how to attract attention. He did everything he could to alert passing planes, other than maybe lighting his sails on fire. According to what Elvis said after he was rescued by a Colombian rescue team, it was a bottle of ketchup that saved his life. He had no food except a single bottle of ketchup, some garlic powder, and chicken stock cubes. Elvis mixed the ketchup and garlic powder with some water simply to provide himself with enough sustenance to keep going. He said it was very hard being alone for so long and that sometimes he lost hope, but then he thought about his family. After being rescued, Elvis was transported to Cartagena to receive medical care. Then he was transferred into the custody of immigration authorities to be shipped back to Dominica. In March 2023, it was revealed that the Heinz Ketchup Company was searching for Elvis. The ketchup mogul wanted to get in touch with the guy so that they could do something special for him, seeing as he has been a pretty good spokesman for their ketchup brand. If you had to survive on one condiment for 24 days at sea, what would you choose? Let me know in the comments. Is the Revenant true? Hugh Glass was a rugged American frontiersman in the 19th century. He was an expert fur trapper who often worked as a guide when newcomers came to North America from Europe. Fur was big business back in the day, and you could make a killing. In 1823, Hugh worked as a guide for General William Henry Ashley. The general was leading a large party of fur trappers when they were ambushed by a pair of Arikara warriors. 15 people in Ashley's party were killed during the attack. As the Europeans continued to flee through the North American wilderness, Hugh was busy at the head of the party scouting for danger. It's difficult to confirm everything involved in the story, since the legend of Hugh Glass spread by word of mouth 200 years ago. Still, Hugh supposedly encountered a grizzly bear as he was scouting far ahead in the forest. The grizzly bear was a mama with 2 cubs, not the kind of animal you want to mess with. He was ferociously mauled by the monstrous bear, but he shot her in the end. Hugh Glass had some serious injuries that he sustained from the bear attack. He was far too damaged to continue with Ashley's party as the guide. 2 members of the party stayed back with Hugh, just in case he recovered and could be saved. The 2 men were John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger. After a couple of days, John and Jim became fearful for their own lives. Hugh didn't seem to be getting much better, and they were worried they too would be killed by beasts or the weather. They abandoned Hugh, leaving him for dead. They even took all his tools and supplies. Hugh survived by crawling through the forest, eating roots and picking berries. He would go on to make a full recovery, then show up later like a ghost at Fort Kiowa. If this story sounds familiar, it's because it's the plot of the movie The Revenant, which is based on the epic survival story of Hugh Glass. The biggest difference between the movie and reality is that Hugh likely didn't go on a bloody killing spree to get revenge against the man who left him in the wild, but maybe. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. Duggar plane crash. In October of 2021, John David and Abby Duggar crashed their airplane and almost died, yet came out totally unscathed. John, 32 years old at the time, was the one piloting the aircraft. The Humphreys County Sheriff's Department said the incident happened at around 7:00 p.m. in Waverly, Tennessee. John said the plane suffered from double engine failure and he was forced to make an emergency landing in a field. The preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board confirmed there was not a single injury sustained. There was John David and Abby, along with 2 unnamed passengers. Nobody was hurt, but the aircraft itself was ripped to shreds. It was utterly destroyed, making the fact that no one was injured feel like a miracle. John David works for Medicorps, a nonprofit that transports relief staff and other supplies to regions affected by severe natural disasters. He wasn't flying the plane for work, but it was registered to the company. When asked how they felt about the incident, the couple said they're just happy to be alive. Nobody understands how everyone on board the aircraft walked away with so much as a scratch. It was truly a bizarre stroke of luck for the Duggar family. Living through a plane crash sounds absolutely terrifying. Before we move on to number 4, I want to give another shout out to Jorge Baptista for supporting this channel. This channel wouldn't be what it is without supporters like you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Hitting the ground hard. On November 14, 2021, adrenaline junkie Jordan Hatmaker hit the ground at 125 miles per hour. Jordan comes from Virginia Beach. She loves every kind of thrill ride or adventure experience she can get her hands on. November 14th was her 16th solo jump out of an airplane. The skydiver knew exactly what she was doing, but that didn't prevent disaster. As she leapt from the plane, Jordan became entangled in her parachute. Jordan had been working toward her accelerated freefall A license. This would be the proof needed for Jordan to finally be allowed to jump without any kind of supervision. But on that day, things went as wrong as they possibly could. The malfunction is known as a horseshoe. It's when the bridle gets wrapped around the jumper's leg. It might have been okay, but Jordan's backup parachute also malfunctioned. Her leg was twisted in the ropes of her primary parachute. Then her reserve parachute was sent in the wrong direction. In the diving community, this is what they call a downplane. The reserve parachute was out, but it only worsened the situation by pushing Jordan into an accelerated downward spiral. At 300 feet off the ground, her primary parachute suddenly deployed, but it didn't slow her fall. 20 seconds from the time she jumped out of the airplane, Jordan hit the ground hard. In most cases, slapping the ground at 125 miles per hour would knock you out cold, but Jordan stayed completely conscious. She lay there awake until rescue operators got her airlifted to Centara Norfolk General Hospital in Virginia. She spent 25 days in the hospital with a cornucopia of injuries: a shattered ankle, broken shin bone, spinal injury, and shattered back. Doctors said it was a miracle Jordan didn't die, and a double miracle that she would make a full recovery. Just a few weeks after she returned home, Jordan was already committed to a trip to Everest. The trip had been scheduled before her unfortunate fall from 13,500 feet. Even though she was still stuck in bed at home, Jordan was determined to at least make it to Mount Everest base camp. She likely couldn't make it to the top of the mountain in her condition, but she would try to get as close as possible. A polar nightmare. Douglas Mawson was the leader of one of the worst polar expeditions in human history. He was also the only member of his party who didn't die, killed by the brutal cold. Douglas set out across the Southern Ocean in search of adventure in 1912. He was 30 years old and an acclaimed geologist. Born in England, Douglas had moved to Australia and settled there. This brought him in close proximity with Antarctica, making polar expeditions easier. He led the Australasian Antarctic Expedition, which anchored off the coast of Antarctica in January 1912. Douglas's plan was to split his expedition force into 4 different groups. Each group would head into the interior to complete scientific work. He himself would lead the Far Eastern Shore Party. The party consisted of 3 men, and their goal was to travel hundreds of miles to survey glaciers. What happened next was utterly terrifying for the explorers. They moved deeper and deeper into frozen territory. They kept almost falling in the cracks in the ice. One of the members had snow blindness. Within a few short days, things were looking bad. On December 13th, the explorers made camp in a glacier. Through the night, the men lay scared, listening to the cracking and booming beneath them. It was just the sound of the ice, but the men had no idea what it was. To them, it sounded like monsters. The next day, Belgrave Ninnis fell through a crack in the ice and was gone forever. His sled went with him, taking the majority of supplies. The other two scientists had no choice but to turn back, but then Xavier Mertz grew ill. After a week of laborious movement, he died. This left Douglas Mawson to carry on alone. He trudged across Antarctica for a month, pulling his sleigh with him. He was sick, weak, and close to death. He almost made it to the main base, but got pinned down by a blizzard for a week. When he finally got to the base, the ship had left without him just hours before. In the ship's defense, they had waited 3 weeks already. They had also left behind a shore party, along with enough supplies to last a few months. Douglas and the shore party were forced to camp at the edge of Antarctica until next December, when the ship came back to pick them up. Dangerous fall. Rosemary Frank was 91 years old in 2020 when she took a nasty tumble. Rosemary fell down inside her home in Kempsey, the UK, and was discovered 2 days later by a volunteer bus driver. After she was taken to the hospital, doctors said Rosemary was 6 hours from dying. If she hadn't been found in the next few minutes, she likely would have perished. The really shocking part of the story is that Rosemary Frank survived lying on the floor of her home in terrible agony by eating plant soil. For 2 long days, she sustained herself on dirt. Rosemary takes the bus to her hair salon religiously. When she didn't show up at her normal time, her bus driver got extremely worried. Volunteer bus driver Derek Cowdery was so concerned for the senior citizen, he took time out of his own schedule to check on her. Derek knocked on her neighbors' doors until he found someone with a key to her apartment. Derek let himself in and found Rosemary lying on the floor of her room, covered in plant soil. The plant had been a gift from her son, but he could never have imagined it would save her life. Alone in the Amazon. Jonathan Acosta recently spent a month alone and afraid in the Amazon jungle. The 30-year-old story might not seem that impressive after hearing about the young children who survived 40 days in the Amazon, but these were different circumstances. The Bolivian was on a hunting trip with some friends when he accidentally got separated on January 25, 2023. 30 days later, search and rescue teams found him withered and haggard. He was wandering through the jungle half dead. After a month, Jonathan was on his last leg. The big difference between Jonathan and the children from Colombia is that Mr. Acosta was not from an indigenous tribe. He was on a hunting trip with a couple of buddies and only knew basic survival techniques. He survived not by using ancient knowledge passed down through generations, but by eating worms and drinking his own urine. It rained nearly the entire time he was lost, allowing Jonathan to collect rainwater easily with his rubber boots. But he wasn't very good at preserving the water. When it stopped raining for a day or two, he resorted to drinking his own bodily fluids. He ended up wandering over 25 miles, but he was going in circles. It didn't help that he dislocated his ankle and was feasted upon by all breeds of horrible bugs. He got into a fight with a wild pig, and Acosta also said he was briefly stalked by a big cat of some kind. It was a real nightmare for Jonathan. When Jonathan was finally rescued, he had lost almost 40 pounds and was days away from death. Do you think you could survive alone and afraid in the Amazon jungle? If so, for how long? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you'd like to see more survival stories coming up. See you later. Bye!